Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights session, where we'll be talking about process, process excellence, optimization, and modeling. And once again, I'm really pleased to be joined by two excellent guests to talk about this topic. So before we get into the detail, as usual, let's start with some introductions. And Stefan, if we can start with you, if you don't mind, please.
Hi there. My name's Stefan MacGregor. I have been involved in process transformation, business analysis, I guess, for maybe about 12, 13 years across various different industries. So I work with Capco, management consultant at the moment with finance, but previously before that, um, public transportation, so ferries, telecoms, insurance as well. So yeah, lots of different types. So yeah, very excited to discuss the topic today.
Excellent, thanks, Stefan. It's always good to have a Capco colleague on as well. It
Yeah,
means we get to talk about it afterwards as well. So
of
brilliant.
course.
All right, good to see you. And Paromita, would you mind doing an introduction for yourself, please?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Paromita Majumder. So I work as a senior product manager with Axxiome Solution. A bit more background about me. I've been a BA for over 15 years now and have been working in financial services throughout. So banking, retail banking, core banking is part of my day-to-day job. When I talk about process optimization, so I was first introduced to it when I was working with IBM back in 2011. So that's when I started, that's when I got my Lean Six Sigma Green Belt certification and then on worked on multiple process optimization projects. Of course, being in banking means today you look at operations process for optimization, tomorrow move on to another. So yes, have got good exposure to that area and I'm really excited to be attending this session today.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Paramita. And also, it's good to see you because I know you've had your name against this topic for a while on the BAInsights list that I have. So it's good to see you. All right, well, let's start with the first question on the topic then. I'll put this one to Stefan. So what does process excellence mean to you, Stefan, in the context of business analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an interesting question. I think for me, process excellence, and that maybe it's because of my background of the quite specific roles I've had have been very, I guess, continuous improvement or lean or kind of process engineering based. I think for me, it always seems to be like a kind of central part of business analysis as a whole. And I always try, or at least I can understand how it relates to any sort of kind of BA related project. You kind of break it down, you're always moving from one stage, a current state, to try and design something new, fancy, which is going to bring you to a future state. And for me, that's the classic kind of process excellence. That's the baseline, that's the foundation. What do we do today? What's the standard? Um, where are the issues, and what do we do to design into the process to make it a fantastic future state? So for me, it's almost something that you can relate across like the end-to-end journey of being a BA, and I think it's something that I think you can always relate back to and just almost integrate it uh, into everything you do, and that always gives you a good kind of stand in and making sure you're attacking the right things really to make sure you're ended up in the right state, the best possible state for the client.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with all those points. Yeah. Parameter, what's your view?
Yeah, yeah. In the context of business analysis, I think process excellence, I think of two areas. First is, of course, business processes, right? So, business processes and excellency of business, any process means improving them to gain not only effectiveness, efficiency, or reducing waste, but also ensuring that we are not compromising with the quality. The other area that I think of as a BA, where we should always be thinking of from a process excellency perspective, is the software development lifecycle as well, where we are very thoroughly involved to ensure that we as BAs, we who potentially is, if you think of a funnel, we are the ones who are actually feeding the work into the development team.
Mm.
We are giving them just the right information at the right time to ensure that we are not it's not leading to waste of development resources or effort, or leading for development resources to sit back or wait for us to give them information. So yeah, these are the two areas that I think of from the context of business analysis that process excellency should, I mean, that's what I refer to as.
And it's actually got a really interesting perspective, because I think it's all very easy for us to think about, applying process excellence, process optimization to a particular project, as it were. But of course, we can always think about the way we approach our analysis, the way we do our process excellence, and try and apply it to that as well. Could we do a better job of preparing for meetings? Could we consider the planning a little bit better than we did before, as well? So I think having that process mindset and that optimization mindset, which is probably a level beyond that, means that we're probably continuously improving ourselves as well as the projects, which is nicely taken on to one of the things I think about as well, as on top of what you both said, is really just that continuous improvement lens that we look at on the process, trying to look at the situation and think, how can we improve it? How can we make it more cost effective, more efficient? But actually, what about the customer experience as well that comes out of it? Is that something else that we can improve as well? So there's a number of different aspects to it. I know others will also think about, is it appropriate to standardize perhaps and automate the process? But I guess generally those things are there to maybe make the process more predictable, more quicker, potentially have it less people focused on it as well. But I feel like that's a good start, particularly from you both as well, to sort of introduce the topic of process optimization and modeling as well. So let's go on to a further point in that, perhaps, if we can. So what is process optimization, and how do you incorporate its principles in your BA role?
It's a good question, and quite a tricky one as well, because I think it's more of a mindset, right? Because many a times we as BAs, we get a problem statement very quickly, we churn up a solution and just try to, push for delivery. But I think we do not take a step back and consider the solution that I have provided. Is that enough? Is that leading to positive or negative impact? And of course, not every negative impact is bad, but in a sense, that due diligence or due check is not. I would say we don't probably get that time in the environment that we work. But yeah, I guess the principles that we as BAs should be taking into consideration is, first, we need to identify the areas that needs enhancement, right? And gather feedback from our stakeholders regularly. It's not necessary that you're working on a project and then only focus on that process, or the processes that are part of your project, but it could be anything, right? That there are processes XYZ and you have heard a lot of noise around it. You can simply gather some feedback and go to your stakeholders, have a regular check-in, measure outcomes. It is extremely important. Many a times we say that, okay, we have kind of made the process quite simple, we have done enhancement, but how are we measuring that it has actually led to some efficiency or some gains, right? Because it's not just about eliminating one step. Maybe you have eliminated one step but introduced three others. So it is quite key. And then I guess collaboration is quite important as well. You cannot do this alone. So collaborating with the teams who are using that process or owns that process is extremely important. And so I think, and continuously review and iterate on the solution that you have implemented, which is quite key. To not just stop that, okay, and this is from my experience. I have seen working on a lean and optimization project where we took quite a few processes and there was a rush to just implement all of them within a very short span of time. And what we did was we picked up the process and we just automated what a person would do, but we never thought of what are the steps that we don't need actually? What are the things that we don't need to do? That was not done. We just thought, okay, you have this, you know what, the robotic solution can manage doing all of it. Let's just go ahead and let's just implement it as is. But we never thought of making the process simpler and easier and get rid of some potential wastes.
And I think that's a really good example there, because it's quite easy perhaps to fall into that trap sometimes of just defining the process, taking it for what it is, maybe building a new solution based on that existing process. But as a BA, whether we've got the explicit scope or not, we should be pushing the envelope and looking at how we can improve that process, or to your point, what steps we can remove as well. And I did really like what you said about measuring as well, and starting thinking about data, because I guess without measuring the process, we can't really quantify the pain points, the issues, what is the right areas to focus on, or even if we do improve the process, how have we actually improved it at all? Because we may well make it worse if we're not measuring it at the start. So some excellent points. I know more excellent points than I recited back, but I won't repeat everything you said. Stefan, what would be your take on that same question?
No, so I totally agree with what Paromita was saying there. And I think it's very easy to lose track or lose sight of what's the right thing to be doing, and not just like kind of blindly saying, right, okay, well, we need to get rid of this X, Y, Z. Let's just put a rubbish process into a robot and make it do it quicker. So I think, yeah, making sure, I guess, delivering value for the client, right, is kind of key, right? So that's one of the kind of aspects that I always think about as well. So just to, I guess, to echo what Paromita was saying, but I think a lot of the time, sometimes you get feedback from a client or a customer or a team you're working with saying, this is just a common sense approach. And I think, well, yes, it is. And I think that's like one of the key aspects of it, that, whether it's lean or continuous improvement or, any other kind of methodology you use, it always kind of boils down to using a data-led approach, taking a view of the process as a whole, understanding what the impacts are, and saying, does this make sense? Should we be doing it? Asking what can seem like daft questions, but if you're in the weeds or fighting fires as somebody in operations or whatever it might be day to day, you can easily lose track of why are we doing these things. And sometimes it takes somebody who's following this kind of structure and data-led approach to say, right, is this the right thing to be doing? These are the kind of impacts, these are the results you're getting. Should we be doing this? Is there a better way of doing it? And then working through that way. So I guess those are two of the main things that I focus on. And then also the other one is, which I learned, I spent 4.5 years at Royal Bank of Scotland as part of a lean practice for a risk management area. And I think where I saw success is understanding that there are people usually attached to these processes. So this is somebody's job that they've been doing day in, day out, maybe for 5 years, 10 years. So really to embrace the kind of human element and collaborate with people on the other side of the process. So you're not just doing something to them. You're not just pushing change on them. You're really working with them to understand what's the best outcome. And where I've seen, the most successful designs or the most successful transformation projects is where we've had, the people on board in the business that we're working with and really kind of all pushing in the same direction to make it happen. So yeah, really, just understanding mindsets and behaviors and what are the kind of, not just the pain points, but I guess the general kind of way people work, how they interact with each other. I think that's an element that can sometimes get lost. So yeah, that's one of the key things for me.
That's excellent advice there, Stefan, because I mean it helps highlight the fact that what we're talking about here in terms of whether it's process modeling or optimization, it's not just a mechanical activity that we're doing. It is, I think one of you made, or both of you made a point around mindset, and it is, trying to think about how you can improve the situation, and that might be improvements in different ways. I mean, we haven't even talked about risk reduction or compliance as an example, which might be one of the other rationales for doing the process work in the first place. But as you said, we're very often not the experts on a particular situation. We might be experts in process and optimization, but we rely on that collaboration with the stakeholders and with the experts and the people doing the work to tell us what's going on and why the situations are what they are, or potentially why things are as odd as they seem. To us when we look at it, we think that maybe it doesn't make sense. But actually, when you speak to people, you can appreciate that perhaps the situation's evolved to what it is, rather than it's what it is by design as well. Or it may be that an individual's process has been severely influenced by what has happened in prior processes, and therefore maybe you can optimize a prior process to then reflect it, to then ultimately fix this one that you're looking at as well. So yeah, really like that point, Stefan, about the people side.
Yeah, and to just add on to that, especially around the people side of things, because in one of the bank transformation project that I worked on, it was heavily focusing on optimizing processes that customer services was working on, and we could see the problems in the processes. We as BAs, of course, we could highlight, oh, why are you doing this? Why, like, you're taking screenshots of these screens and saving it on a folder when, for your manager to have a look, when your manager can actually log into the system. It's much easier for them to go through the data, but they were not ready to give it up because it took them almost between 5 to 7 minutes to take screenshot of all the screens, put it in a folder, save it, and that was like taking them the whole day to work on 50, 70 such cases. And they had a full-time job to do that. And if that step was eliminated, potentially it meant their workload is reduced by half, and they're like, oh, are we losing our job? That a, a very crucial bit is going away. So it is quite important that when you are working in such projects, that you're collaborating with the people and ensuring that if you are gaining this time, it is for you to work on something better, not to do something that really doesn't add any value. So
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely worth making that point. So I'm glad you did. Stefan, I'd like to know if there are any methods or frameworks that you find effective when you're looking for opportunities to optimize a process.
Yeah, well, I think so. I've been, I guess, educated in the kind of lean methodology, so I always kind of fall back to my favorite classics, and can't really beat a combination of, 8 wastes. So walking through the process with, whether it's feeding back to team leaders, senior managers, or even the people that, within the job themselves, and just pointing out, okay, this looks like you're maybe doing a bit too much here, so we're going to class that as overproduction. We can see that, we have cases that build up for 2 days at a time. So that, okay, is that waiting? Can we? And then all of a sudden you build up a picture, and you look from end to end across the process, and you see, right, okay, wow, there's all these kind of bottlenecks, pain points there, areas where, like to Paramita's point about the previous example, they're probably doing too much in some cases, and that's maybe learned behavior, or as you say, like something that's been implemented when it was a necessity, but now things have moved on, but yet the standard has stayed the same. So I always think, like, looking through that lens of kind of wastes, different types of wastes, and then building onto that, almost like tagging on, say, right, okay, well, this is what we can see if we just take some kind of really, again, fundamental viewpoints, move on to ECRS analysis. So that stands for eliminate, combine, rearrange, and simplify. And that is almost getting to start people to think, all right, if actually, yeah, if we move that report check to the end there, we could combine it with, everything else that gets checked in the process, and that'll free up some time earlier on. So it's almost trying to coach or bring everybody else that's within the business to think in that way about the process. And it's simple concepts, but I think again it kind of ties into that common sense approach. Fairly simple concepts, but easy and effective to apply. And for me, that is really, an effective way to get people on board, get them working on the process themselves, bring them along the journey. Sometimes I think something's super complicated, or coloration and scatter plots and box plots and all this kind of like really high end Six Sigma stats can freak people out a little bit. So when I'm starting, especially on a transformation journey or a process engineering project, then it's the fundamentals and the basics like that I think can be so effective.
Yeah, and once again, what with most of these sessions, there's always a technique I've never heard of before or an approach. So ECRS, we'll make a note of that one. And
yeah, it's a good one.
Paromita, what's your view on that question around methods and frameworks?
Yeah, so I think I have always done a 4-step approach when working on any sort of optimization project. So the first bit have always been identify a problem, and probably the most enjoyable part as a BA, because you get to use a lot of techniques, and some of the very well-known techniques in this area is, of course, first to identify a problem is to get a pain point catalog ready. And for that, you can use multiple techniques like fishbone analysis, my absolute favorite, 5 whys, and of course, root cause analysis, very basic, but helps to identify, the contributing factors to a problem or an event. So you can use multiple techniques to at least get a list of problems first. And of course, Stefan talked about the 8 ways, and Tim Woods is absolutely a genius technique. I think we do not use it a lot. And I always, whenever working in such projects, I know we are working in a hybrid mode at this moment, but what I've really found effective is get everybody in a room, divide them into 2 or 3 teams, give them the maps, tell them where do you see a problem, identify the waste, just tell them about Tim Woods, and you will see an excellent list of problems coming on, and it has really worked and helped. So that's the first step, always, that identifying the problem. Then I think what I have always used is to, once I have the problem statements, identify whose problem is it, who is the stakeholder, who is impacted, how much does it impact. So that gives you the list of the stakeholders, or you have a view of the impacted areas, a number of people impacted, and who should be concerned and who shouldn't be concerned. Then the next step is for you to identify the list of, out of the list of problems, can you solve the problem? If you cannot solve the problem, it's not in your scope, it needs to sit somewhere else, right? And maybe when you are going through the problem, reading a problem is actually a solution solving another problem. So that's a potential solution for you. And the last bit is to identify symptom of another problem. So when you have the list, you go through the problems and say, okay, if I read problem A, if I am fixing problem A, it fixes problem C and D and E. So those are symptoms of problem A. So they can sit in a separate backlog. And this has really helped me. This is the framework that I have continuously used, because whenever you are in such an environment where you have to look at multiple processes, right? So you have to prioritize which one you need to look at first. So it's quite essential that you have that problem list, which helps you identify the most problematic problem, a problematic process, or identify the processes or the chronology of processes you need to attack. So yeah, that's the framework that I've used mostly.
Yeah, and I mean that seems like really really logical, simple but effective framework, really, in terms of making sure we know about the root causes, and not trying to just fix the symptoms of problems, because invariably we'll optimize a process and it won't really be that optimal. It will just be slightly better, maybe, than the current one.
Yeah.
So yes, I really like that point. And I'm going to stick with simple as well. I mean, I find just to sort of almost frame the piece of work that you're doing from a process optimization perspective, just using the DMAIC approach, to just define the problem or situation, then to measure and to analyze and then look to improve and control the process as well. And particularly, probably there's a few points along that domain life cycle that are easily forgotten, like the measuring and the control. I think it's probably quite logical to people to want to improve the process, and to improve it, you probably want to analyze it, and you're probably analyzing it because you define there's a problem. But actually, if we don't continue to measure the problem, we don't really know, what we should fix first. I think to the point you made, Paramita, but also, are we really improving the problem and the situation? And actually, how in the future can we stop it happening again, which is the control side as well. So that for me is an example of a fairly simple technique that we can just keep to the back of our heads when we're thinking about process optimization as well. But I know that there's plenty of others. I won't talk too much about it, but I think like process mining and data analysis or data analytics can help. I know, Stefan, you mentioned Lean and Six Sigma as well. And I really like the point I think Paramita made about just speaking to the stakeholders, because if you've got a load of process optimization techniques in your back pocket, but you're not actually speaking to anybody, it's a bit of a waste of time. You're probably better off speaking to people and putting the techniques on hold, I would say. And I was sort of talking, we talked there about frameworks, and I know we started touching on perhaps some of the techniques as well. But are there any techniques or tools, Paramita, that you tend to use from a process modeling or analysis or improvement perspective?
So in terms of, there is, each modeling technique have their own use, and pretty much depends on the project or the type of work you are doing. So you need to select it wisely, right? Like, while a process map is to create a workflow for a process, but a business process mapping is the practice of identifying relationships between different process elements such as strategies, business capabilities, and all of that. Similarly, I think UML, when you talk about UML, it's quite useful in digital projects because you show activity or the sequence of activities, though it is not being used much, but I think it's one of the most useful technique. But yes, so yeah, I think UML is quite good when working on digital projects. But for me, my go-to is always process mapping, just based on the type of work I do or the projects that I work on. And of course, there are different levels of process mapping, but at different stages of a project, like at the very initial, always have L2 or max of L3 process mapped for easy identification of opportunities, and then enhance it further as the project rolls on. But yeah, that's more process maps is my go-to modeling technique.
And I think, you're glad you mentioned it. I mean, it is a really fundamental, but very obvious and logical and super useful technique, really. And as you mentioned there, once you've got those processes, irrespective of the level they're at, it gives you so many opportunities then to really identify who the right people are, who's affected, I think, which you pointed out before, and just paint that picture for yourself so you can start to understand the context as well as, the problem processes as well. So yeah, I think that's a brilliant start for anyone when they're thinking about techniques, process and process flows or models are probably the first technique to pick up, I would say. Stefan, following what Paramita said, any techniques that you might want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Paramita as well about process mapping being, fantastic. Definitely like BPMN 2 standards as well. So I guess that's, again, all these kind of icons and familiar aspects you'd see in a normal process map, but you'll be surprised about how many places you go to and they just don't stick to those standards, or they have an interpretation of them, or uh, which again, well, I guess is kind of contradiction to the point about saying, right, this is how we're going to document all our processes. We should want them consistent. It's funny that quite a lot of places don't don't follow that. I think so. For me, process maps are probably my favorite. I have in the past used value stream mapping. And I think it's probably easier when you have either you're dealing with something physical that you can almost kind of follow through a process, or at least something that has a clear kind of start to end path. And I think maybe because you can easily show, okay, where are the value add points, where are the non-value add points, where is all these steps in the process, do they actually contribute towards finishing this product off, whether it's a mortgage application or a lorry getting from A to B, whatever it is. I think that's a very powerful picture that you can show to a client to say, well, here's everything with all that waste built into it, all these unnecessary checks, additional stuff that's happening. Here's the potential. If we strip that all out, it's usually quite a stark kind of jump, which normally gets clients quite excited, which is quite exciting. But I guess it's quite difficult to apply that sometimes to a lot of the processes we come up against, especially in financial services, that maybe require a lot of human judgment and thought and almost kind of theoretical stuff behind it. So, for example, a recent example, working on sanctions processes for a bank, and a lot of that is having people reviewing cases, applying their judgment, applying their expert knowledge, and really kind of digging deep into something to make a decision. And if you just looked at that, on a page, it can say, well, okay, why does this take so long? But in a value stream map that might get lost, whereas in a process map you can really almost enrich it to say, right, okay, these activities happen here, but then we can add notes and we can add our ideas and context around behind that, and then again start to link in with like customer journeys as well. So I think process mapping is quite a pliable tool that you can apply to different almost different viewpoints or different aspects of a similar output or a similar outcome. But it's got a very, I guess there's a very set way of doing it, but it's got so many different outcomes.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about the standards. I think in terms of different ways that you can map processes. I mean, it could be, for example, that one BA in the team or one team are using BPMN, another team might be using UML activity diagrams, another team might just be doing quite basic process flows, and that in itself is going to be quite difficult to compare the three processes because they look a little bit different. So it really does sort of demonstrate the importance of applying that process mindset, trying to having some standards. You don't always necessarily pick the right ones, but at least being consistent across the team and across your maps is helpful. So that really does come across, and it's probably no surprise, but the pair of you are obviously talking about different ways to map the process, whether it's our high level value streams or whether it's the more detailed BPMN as well. So I think what I would add would be really along a similar thing, which are slightly different ways to map the process, which I find effective sometimes. Namely like control flow diagrams or hybrid process flows are quite a quick way to define that. Very recently, I've discovered or heard about universal process notation, or UPN. Nice way to do a plug. There is a BAInsights session a few episodes back on that topic as well. So definitely worth a watch on that one. But that was quite enlightening and interesting as a simple way to define the process as well. I think those sort of quite simple approaches to just get down on paper what's happening, who's doing it, where the bottlenecks are, is always effective. So I won't waffle on. I can't add much more than what you both said. Excellent points. So we talked a little bit up to now in terms of, I think we're clear on why we want to optimize the process and some of the frameworks or techniques that we apply to do that. I wonder, Stefan, I mean, are there any any challenges in applying rather optimization when in practice, effectively, when you're on a project, whether that's in a complex environment, perhaps somewhere highly regulated, or maybe just a simple environment, but it could still be complicated to implement.
Yeah. So I think there's quite a couple of points to this. I think especially working in banking, financial services in general, I guess they're quite risk averse, right? And that's down to the business, right? So I think some of the aspects or values around about kind of process optimization or process improvement sometimes is almost like, right, well, we need to try this solution, test if it works, as you say, measure, control it, and if it doesn't work, we need to try something else. That's obviously not the solution. Let's go back, redesign it, and test it again. I think sometimes from my experience, especially in financial services industry, is very much like, whoa, well, let's not do absolutely anything until we're 100% sure it's the right thing to do, which I think sometimes can have its benefits, but in others it gets in the way of your rapid improvements, your small incremental improvements that a lot of the time you just do it, and whether that's down to red tape bureaucracy or being risk averse or a combination of the two. I think that's quite a common theme. I think previously when I worked in telecoms, they were a lot more, I mean, I don't want to say gung ho is the phrase, but like they were a lot more open and keen to just, okay, the team found a solution, let's implement it, test it, like look at it over a period of a month. If it's not worked, okay, great, right, fine, we'll try something else. If it has worked, fantastic. Let's implement it, company wide, department wide, make it the standard, and build on from there. So I think different industries definitely have their tolerances, and I think it's interesting to be able to, I guess, see both sides of the story there. And I think kind of really, I guess, high regulatory areas, again, whether that's risk management or regulatory reporting or anything that's kind of high materiality, there's usually a lot of non-value add activity, but it's deemed as essential non-value add activity because it's checking, double checking, in some cases triple checking, just to make sure that outputs are right, data is where it should be, and I think obviously that can come up against sometimes what we're trying to do to say, right, okay, let's strip out what's needed, and what's not needed. Sorry, let's strip out what's not needed, try and improve the process a little bit. I guess obviously doing it with the right outcome in mind, with the right values in mind. But and this kind of goes back to some of our previous points. These highly regulatory areas, there's been rules in place for a long time that have probably been there for years and years and years, and people are terrified of changing them in case they fall on the wrong side of those regulations, right? So even though processes have changed, technology have changed, the way people work's changed. So yeah, that can definitely cause a clash sometimes.
And it makes me think in that example that perhaps there might be in many cases a root cause behind that in terms of the availability or transparency of the data. So that
yeah.
I mean, I think customers of banks will be quite reassured to know that obviously banks are risk averse, as they should be. But I think if they had more data to perhaps know that they've over a certain period of time they've done 1,000 transactions and actually they've never had any issues, then it makes them more confident that they could progress and change that process or try and improve a little bit. Whereas, if it's uncertain, the implications of changing a process because you maybe don't know the knock-on effects or you don't know what transactions passing through it, I can understand why there'd be that reluctance. And perhaps in that situation, that's why we as BAs can start to recognise that actually maybe the effort should be focused on understanding the process and measuring it first, because that'll be a lot more valuable than running the risk of improving something that actually causes it. Yeah, that's excellent points there, of course, by yourself, Stefan. So thank you. Now, Paramita, what would be your view on any challenges as well?
Yes, I completely agree with both of your point because, of course, in working in banking industry in the past 12 years, I've been just working on a lot of regulatory projects, and of course, as part of them, we hardly could improve any processes. Rather, I think we degraded a lot of process just because we wanted a four-eye check on everything so that we don't fall in the bad books of the regulators. So it is becoming quite difficult. So those two things in terms of optimizing a process and getting the right outcome, they are kind of contradictory. It becomes very difficult at this point in the banking industry for sure. So I think that's one of the challenges. Secondly, I think when for any optimization work, the business case needs to be solid, and for that you need to ensure that you have done the proper discovery work to identify the right processes you need to work on. Very often we don't see that happening, and what has happened is once you have delivered optimization for a process, you don't see any gains because you did not have the right set of data to formulate your business case. It was more of assumptions and understanding rather than looking at the data to formulate your business case. So I think that's another challenge I have seen for any optimization project. And there's always this rush, and that's something I've mentioned before as well, that a person is doing it, let us uplift and put it for someone else to do it, which is like if so many robotic technical solutions are available in the market today, let them do that, and it's forget about optimization, that and let's do it quickly. That is another challenge, because what happens is many a times for any manual process, right, there are so many edge cases, there are so many things that a person does if they see your data is incorrect, right? We do not consider all of that as part of the automation, and very quickly it fails. So what happens in reality is, where you thought you have gained three FTs, really you haven't, because they are still having to work on the backlog of the issues which couldn't be processed. So yeah, so I think that's another issue that I have seen with this.
Excellent. Yeah, and I would totally agree with those points. I think on top of that, I think in terms of some of the challenges I sometimes see is actually just recognition, either that process optimization is something that needs to be done, or perhaps recognition that it's part of the other thing that we are doing. So to add a bit more examples to that, it's quite typical. Sometimes we might get asked to implement a solution, and actually it can be quite a technical focus. When actually, if we're a bit more open about the fact that there is the technical solutions, of course, but we should be looking for opportunities to improve the processes as well as embed new systems as well. I think the two of them, if you have that mindset of these things happening together, then you're going to be getting more value and more improvements than you might have imagined before. I think as well, I think just tooling awareness as well can sometimes present challenges. I think maybe sometimes there's an emphasis on what is the right tool that we should use. Should we have a tool before we can start? And actually, maybe the more important thing to do is actually to have those standards in place that Stefan mentioned earlier, and to have good process, good approach to process, and defining the process, than worrying too much about what tool you start modeling that process in. Because I'm pretty sure at a certain level, whether you use something as simple as Visio with the right standards, or use Aris or Blueworks or any other myriad of tools that are out there, fundamentally they have the same high level functionality to draw boxes and lines. Some of them have a little bit more richness, so you can start to report on that data, and to add a few other objects, or in the case of perhaps seeing that BPMN objects that you might want to see. But fundamentally, it's not really about the tool, it's about the mindset, and it's about the interaction with the people, and it's about learning about the organization you're in. The definition of the process is a relatively minor thing to some extent.
And this reminds me of two more points around the challenges, really. So I think uh, with some people working on a process forever, I think, Stefan, you mentioned about it, they're not ready to give it away or optimize it, right? And it especially becomes a challenge when they are doing something, especially from an audit perspective, or they think compliance might need it, because it is extremely hard in the banking industry, that you get compliance approval to remove a process, especially around auditing, right? So that even if it is not a value added step, right? And in such cases, what I have seen is, if even if you go to higher management stakeholders for sign off, the risk appetite is very less, so you do not get that sign off, or you do not get that buy-in. So really, where you had an opportunity, it's a missed opportunity if you do not have people to, who have the same mindset of, yes, we need to optimize the process, we need to try it, test it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we fail, and but we tried. So that's quite key as well.
And just wondered, we talked a little bit as well about modelling approaches earlier on. I mean, is there a, I'll ask you this, Paromita, how do you decide really what process or modelling approach that is best suited for you and for the project that you're in?
Well, I think, uh, as always, it depends on the project type. As I said before, like in most of the banking projects, process maps are go to. You have to build the process map. In certain digital projects that I've worked on, I would dump the process map and rather do a user journey, because it's easy, or it's easily understandable, but by everyone, not only just me, my technical team, my set of BAs or our architects. Rather, if I have to go and present it to my higher management, it's easily understandable in a language that's easy. So always a pictorial representation in the form of user journey, or in the form of a process map workflow, which is very simple, helps. In terms of certain data heavy projects that I have worked on, I feel that data modeling is quite essential and key. It is tedious, but I think if you have a good data model defined with class diagrams and everything, it helps down the line with the project. So the key is to understand the project type, and based on the project type, what are the techniques that you can use, and simultaneously look at your stakeholders and understand, like, what are the key techniques modeling techniques you need to use, so that what you are delivering is all of them can understand it easily. So it might not be just one, it could be two different modelings. You have two different techniques that you have to use.
Yeah, that's really a really good point. And in terms of just making sure that whatever you use, it's something that can be understood by the recipient. So probably, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you can't use a complex technique. It just means you might have to invest a bit of time educating the stakeholders so they can actually interpret what you're giving them as well. So yeah, excellent point. Stefan, are there any advice you can share in terms of how you decide on approach or approach?
Yeah, I think I guess what's really useful, I think, is sometimes maybe is not invested enough, is almost like the mobilization phase of a project. So discovering what's out there. So, to Paramita's point there, so is there data available? Is it rich enough? Is it accurate? How often is it updated? Like it's almost like I guess a maturity level across different aspects. So data being one of them, I guess, what existing standards and ways of working, how do they deal with their data that they've got as well? Do they measure the process? Do they focus on the right metrics? Do they have metrics in place? I guess, what's the wider culture and openness to change? And I guess obviously this is all relative to the scale of project you're carrying out. Is it a full, complete, transformation of, or a program of work, or is it, focusing on one specific process that kind of, I guess, dictates how much you delve into these topics. But I think having that mobilization view to say, right, we are going to look at all of these aspects, take into account, how the business area works as a whole, and what kind of key components are the inputs that we need to be able to understand, find out what the issues are, use the same outputs to then again, either refine, redesign, or use as is to get to the right outcome and the right outputs that we need. So I think that is a key aspect, and that almost kind of advises what tools you might need to introduce or what techniques would be more useful. And again, maybe just touching back to the culture point and Paromita's point about kind of getting stakeholders on board and understand what they're going to, what they are going to understand and how to communicate it. It's understanding what current standpoint are they at, and how are you best going to influence them to come on board with that change. Because you really need to almost agree up front, what is this overarching reason for this change, and that is almost like your kind of anchor point that everything else can link into, to say, right, well, remember, this is why we're doing this, and all of these kind of key components will link into that or help along the way. And the earlier you do that in a project, the better. If you can do it before the main bulk of work even starts, then you've nailed it.
I mean, I think that's a really, really good point, because the process isn't typically the end result. It's a means to an end. So actually having that eye on what is actually going to happen as a result of defining the process, how are you going to communicate the key messages, the requirements, the recommendations, whatever it might be. If you have that view, then whichever approach you utilize, you're actually probably working a bit more efficiently to deliver that view at the end of your modeling. So I think that's a really, really, really good point. I think you both touched on things where it made me think about, the organization in which you're in, because quite often, we work for organizations that haven't or that have done this before. We might do things slightly differently because we might have worked in a particular organization, or we might have used different tools. But, first port of call, try and ask those at the organisation you're at, what standards do we have? What tooling do we have? What approaches do we have in place? Is there a centre of excellence? Is there something I can leverage? Because that's a lot easier than having to redesign an organisation's approach as you walk in for the first time. And likewise, I think if you find yourself in an organisation where that maybe isn't in place, look inwards to the team. And if the team have got some particular skills and experience or knowledge of processes or approaches or tools, leverage that. And that's probably something to we should always do, irrespective of whether it's just process. But brilliant. I mean, we've covered plenty of things in almost an hour, so I really do appreciate it, the pair of you. And I think the overarching session really has just been loads of good advice to people, to BAs, and more widely on process and process optimization, and how to just think about process and techniques to use as well. So I'm sure it'll be useful. I've certainly found it interesting as usual. For anyone out there that has also found it useful or got points to add, I would definitely say, use the comments, subscribe, like, do all that good stuff to interact. And if there's anything you want to add, or you share your own experiences, use the comments for that. I'd definitely be really glad to hear about it. And who knows, it might inform the basis of a session later on. Maybe it's the process excellence and optimization too in the future. But before all that, but thank you very much, Stefan and Paromita. Really good to speak to you. Really appreciate the time. And I'll look forward to speaking to you both more widely in the BA community at some stage.
Thanks for having me on, John.
All right. Thanks both. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.